Hello everyone, it's Teresa from Sewn Together here and welcome to part 3 of our Celestial Beauty Sew Along. So today we are going to be talking about how to stitch our prepared blocks to our background fabrics. For those of you who need to catch up, still in part 1 we talked about how to prepare your fabrics and working with Epiflex templates. In part 2 we stitched our prepared pieces together, and today part 3 we have our beautiful circular blocks. We're going to remove our papers and we're going to applique them to the background to complete our blocks. So of course you can make this project any size that you like. So I'm working with a pre-prepared 10-inch stacker pack. So my blocks are going to be 9.5 inches finished, but you can of course make them whatever size you prefer. So just a little bit of a rundown. It's a really versatile project. So let's get started. I'm heading off to my sewing room. We're going to need a little mini iron or a regular iron today. So I'm heading off to my sewing room and I'll meet you there in a sec. Let's get started appliquing our completed block sections to our backgrounds on our Celestial Beauty Star blocks. So I have got a couple of my blocks here. Let me pop that out of the way. So I've got a few of my circles stitched and I've got my background fabrics here. So I'm using, as I said, I'm using a 10-inch stacker pack. Moda call these a layer cake. So I'm using these for my background fabrics. If you need to refer back to week 1, you can. So that's when I talked about setting some of these aside for your background. Of course, you can use any background that you choose. You can use multiple colors. You can either cut them to 10 inches, which will make your finished block 9.5 inches, or if you would prefer to work with a more regular size, if you cut your finished block at about 11 inches, you can applique your piece on and then you can trim them back to 10.5, which will then give you a 10-inch finished block. So if you're going to be doing quilt as you go, I would suggest that you cut your blocks to at least 11 and then quilt your blocks, and then you can trim them back after you've finished your quilting, depending on the size sashing that you're wanting to use. So I'm going to be just stitching mine together and then quilting, but in about 4 weeks or so I will put together another video and talk to you about quilt as you go and options for joining as well. So I've got my background square here. I'm going to put these aside. All tangled up with my thread here. Going to put that aside as well. The other things that we're going to be using today is I love my purple thing for removing my papers. I've got a pair of thread snips. I've got my mini iron turned on and my wool pressing mat. You can of course use a regular ironing board and a regular size iron. I just find that I'm less likely to burn my fingers with the mini iron, and I can have it beside my sewing machine and in my sewing room if I choose to. And you're going to need some pins. I love the little Clover applique pins because I don't get my thread tangled around them as much because they're shorter, but any pins, fine, good quality pins will work. And of course we will need some spray starch. And my favourite is Heaven Sent Spray Starch. This is an Australian product. I know a lot of you have used this product and it is fantastic. My favourite scent, I keep calling them flavours and I know they're not flavours because you don't drink them. My favourite scent is lemon myrtle. So that's what I'm going to be using today. So let's get started. So here's one of my blocks. And I have finished my stitching and I have already pressed this one. So I'm going to swap to one that hasn't been pressed. This one hasn't been pressed. Okay, so you can see that my centers are a little bit all over the place and my tails are sticking out. So what I'm going to do is I am going to give it a really good spray starch on the front. And you really can't go overboard with this spray starch. It's not going to cause any problems. I've never found it to cause any spots or streaks on cotton fabrics. I've not tried it on any other fabrics apart from 100% cotton. And it's fine, of course, to have it ironed on our spray on our templates because they are heat proof. Pop that out of the way. Now, when you're using any spray starch or any sizing, no matter what brand you're using, you need to make sure that when you spray it on, you take a few breaths and you let it soak into the fibers. If I were to spray and iron, all I'm doing is taking that spray starch off and applying it to the base of my iron. So it needs a little bit of time to actually soak into the fibers. Okay. So it is nice and damp, and what I can then do is I can go around and I can press my seam allowances back where they should be. And I'm just going to press my corners. Now it's okay that the iron comes in contact with the templates. So I've got this on slightly less than max, so I've got it more, I would say like a cotton setting, and just use the iron. I'm not ironing it as such, it's just having a press. So I'm just pushing those templates back in the direction that they were originally basted. Just let the glue will actually release quite a lot because of the heat of the iron. I'm going to just pop that and that template. So see how I've got my little tail is tucked in there by accident? That's okay, actually. I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm going to just press that down. Give it a press. I'm working my way around the outside edge for the moment. Making sure I've got nice curves on the outer edge. And my template has actually even started to lift. So I'm going to just lift that up, slide that template back in place. In fact, to be honest, I think I'll just remove it because it's just going to be too hard to pop back in place. It has been securely stitched, so I can just pop it out. Just let the heat of the iron do the work. Fingernails are really good for this as well, to help hold in place. And this one's coming out as well, and I think that's just because this was one of the first ones that I stitched, and it's been folded up and moved around in my box and used as a sample a few times. So my templates are popping out, which is fine. I'm going to be taking them out in a sec anyway. Don't get too stressed if by chance your templates do start to come out. It's not the end of the world. If it's an edge piece and you need to still stitch another piece to it, what you can do is you can actually come back and just glue that little area back in place again for the side that you've got to stitch. Now you'll notice that what's starting to happen is some of my glue is lifting away, and that's a combination of the starch and the heat, and that's exactly what we want, in that we want to be able to remove our templates easily. So this is my last one. Just going to press that in place. Now we need to work with the center. So what we're going to be doing is all our center diamonds should have had your tails facing in the same direction. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just work around, and I'm actually going to place them So they are laying in the direction that they were basted. And what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a pinwheel in the center. So you can see that if I just have them all in the direction that they're basted, what happens is you get a little pinwheel in the center. And I have got a few fraying threads here, and that's okay. So that spray starch will actually stop your threads from your fabric from fraying a lot as well. Don't forget, when you do come to do your quilting for anything that's English paper piecing related, remember that you can't stitch in the ditch for your English paper piecing because there's no seam allowances that are tucked underneath that. So traditionally, if you were hand quilting your English paper piecing, you would quilt a 1/4 inch in from each edge, and what that does is that takes the pressure off the seam. So if you stitch just along the seam allowance, you're actually not catching any fabric. All you're doing is just stitching along where you've already stitched, and that's not going to give stability to your fabric. So we've got a nice little pinwheel in the center. I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to give it really, really good press. Now the secret to giving it a good press is really not about using a high heat. It's about taking your time and letting the iron do its thing. So what I'm doing is just slowly moving the iron over and letting it work its magic. Now you can see over this side, what's happened is that template the glue is actually released, and that template, I've got a really bumpy edge. So that's easily fixed. All I'm going to do is just come back to the wrong side and just press in place. Okay, so there we go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the templates out, and I'm going to show you a little trick for just tidying up our center point a little bit. So to remove our templates, I like to do it while it's warm. If you do it while it's warm, what you find is that the templates come out really easily. And I've just got to work out where I have put them. So that combination of spray starch, heat, helps your templates relax and helps the glue release really, really easily. And because this spray starch smells so gorgeous, it just makes your project smell wonderful as well, which is a super bonus. So I'm going to take all the star points out to start with. That one's already out. That one's almost out. There we go, they're all out. And now it's time to take out our outer edges. And you can see just how easily they are sliding out. One of the other factors that affects the ability to remove your templates is how much glue you put on at the beginning. And if you need to go back and refresh how I glue my templates, go back to part 2 and just have a little look. And also you can have a look at the other videos that I've done with English paper piecing. You can see that I am quite sparing with my glue. Of course, as soon as I start saying that, I've got one that's a little tougher to come out. If it's getting a little firm, to lift up. You can always just rub it over with the iron again and it will release. Now, because we have spray starched all of this, most of our seams are actually sitting exactly where we want them to. But what we can do is we can just gently pat them down with the iron and just remind them where we want them to sit. So I'm just being really gentle with the iron with this. I'm not actually using the full weight of the iron, just patting it down. Okay, we can flip it over. And now we can be a little bit more vigorous. And that is our completed block with our templates removed. So I'm just going to leave my iron set up over there. How cool is that? Love it. Okay, so how do we fix our little center? Okay, so I'm going to just get my thread, and you're going to need a pin as well. So I've got my Daco Bob thread, which is my favorite thread that I use for English paper piecing. It's super fine, but it's also a super strong thread as well. Let me just pop that there. So I use a double strand of thread because I am hopeless at losing needles. So you don't actually need to use a double strand of thread for strength. I just find when I use a single strand of thread, I find that the needle falls off all the time, particularly because I start and stop my stitching on quite often. So I find for me, a double strand means that I can leave my needle and thread attached to my project, just tie a knot, and then I can just come back and keep stitching and not have to worry about where my thread has disappeared to. I know some of you like to marry the thread to the eye of the needle. I've tried it, it doesn't work for me, but that doesn't mean that it won't work for you. Try a few different things. If you just Google marrying the thread to the eye of the needle, you will get lots of tutorials on how to do it. I find it's a lot more difficult when you've got a really super fine thread, but there is no right or wrong. It's just whatever works for you, and just keep trying different methods until you find the perfect one for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be working from both the front and the back, and I'm going to be using my thread, and I'm actually going to be going through the points of my block. So I'm going to tuck through here into the point of my star, and I'm actually going to stitch around in a circle and pull my star points together. So my next one that I've got is my white, and it's pretty good. No, actually the next one I'm going to be going this way, so it's going to be the blue. So what I'm going to do is just go through, and I'm just grabbing a stitch or two right at the point. I need to make sure I'm still under the camera. A stitch in the center. Get that little tail out of the way. And then I'm going to move that one out of the way. And then I'm going to grab a little stitch right at the fold of my next star point. And it can be a little difficult to see. Just a little stitch at the center. And if you fold it right back out of the way. You only need to grab a couple of threads right at the center of your star point and go to the next one, which is green, and I can actually grab two here together. You will find that the more blocks you stitch, the better your points will get. Now, don't be too hard on yourself. Remember that we're working with fabric and it does have natural movement, and so you'll find that the points aren't always perfect. And that's okay, because this is a quilt that you've made. This isn't a manufactured or printed article. This is handmade by you, and we're not perfect. A print fabric shows a lot less errors than a plain fabric. And I've just got my tails caught in there. Just going to pull that through and untangle this little tail. I'm making this look much harder than it really is, and I think that's because I'm trying to do it under the camera. And I'm also, it's really hot here today in Brisbane, so I've turned off the aircon. So it's, I'm melting, I have to say. There we go. That's untangled that. There we go. So I'm just going to flip it over to the front, and you can see how much neater my points are simply by gathering those little pieces into the center. So you just tie that off, and you can go around your center point a couple of times if you need to get some reinforcing done, or if you find once you've finished your stitching that you do have a little gap in the center, because that can sometimes happen. But I'm pretty happy with my start point, and to be honest, I don't think anybody's going to be examining it quite that closely anyway. So I'm going to leave it the way it is. I'm going to just knot off my thread. Making sure I've still got a nice pinwheel in the center. Okay, put my thread, and that's all we need to do with that. Okay, so the applique process is really, really simple. If you're wanting to learn applique and you are not sure about the needle turn process, this is actually a really good place for you to start to practice, because we don't have any templates in our fabric, but we do have the edge already prepared for you, so that can help as well. There's a multitude of ways of doing applique. If you don't feel confident taking your templates out before you do this process, you can actually applique it first, and then you can remove the templates by cutting into the back. But the spray starch gives you such great stability, it's really not necessary to do it that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give myself some little registration points. So I'm not ironing it too deeply, like just got some little marks on the side. Okay. There we are. So we've got our block. Now I like them so that the star points, the V is actually on the four sides. That's the traditional way that you would line it up, but of course however you place them on your blocks is purely up to you, because this is your quilt. So I've got my little applique pins, and what I'm going to do is on these two measurements here, so that's going to be my center line through there and there, and then our center line for our block top and bottom, goes through this center stitch here. Okay, and I am going to just pop a few pins in so it's nice and flat. And then have a look and make sure that I'm happy with where it's laying, because it's easy enough to change at this point. And don't stretch your blocks out, but we do want it nice and flat. There we go, and I'm happy with that. I think that looks great. I'm going to come back and I'm going to pin in each of these sections. Okay. And I'm going to actually pin in each of the star points as well. So I like lots of pins in place, that way I know that it's all going to hold. If you preferred at this point to glue based, you could certainly run around with your glue stick under the edge, under this edge, and glue in place, and that would work as well. Just keep the glue away from the area that you're going to applique down, because it's really hard to stitch through. And we have got just a couple more to pin. Almost there. Done. Okay, so we are pinned in place and ready to go. So again, I'm using a double thread. It's not necessary, but for me, it just what works for me with regards to not losing needles. So, you know, if you prefer to stitch with one thread, it's perfectly fine. It's just doesn't work for me. So what I'm going to do, and you will find your own method of what's comfortable for you. So I'm going to just open this up, going to bring my needle through right on my fold line. I'm missing a pin from there, so I'm going to just pop one in. Okay. Now the applique stitch, I'm left-handed of course, so I'm going to be going the opposite direction to all the right-handed ones amongst you. Just simply take a small back stitch into the background fabric and then come up through the back of the fold of your top fabric and pull through. So take a small back stitch, and when you come through on the back side of the fold of your fabric. Okay. And just make sure you don't end up with a little thread loop. Again, just come through, and if you prefer, you can actually do it in 2 stitches. So take a small stitch into your background and then take a small stitch into your applique fabric, but you take it from underneath and come through at the bottom side of your fold of your fabric. So if I'm saying this is the top side, so this is the bottom side of the fold of your fabric. So what we want to have is we want our stitches to be invisible. So we actually want the fabric to roll over the top of the stitches. And you can see by using a super fine thread that my stitches are almost invisible, and I'm using a double strand. So you're going to just continue stitching all the way around with those When you come to these sections where your star points meet and you've got your curved section, just use your needle or your purple thing and tuck those underneath. Okay, and you'll just continue stitching all the way around and your block is done. So when I flip it to the back, you do have an extra layer of fabric on the back of your block, which is covering the back of your applique. It's a personal choice for you whether you trim that fabric away or whether you leave it. If you're really scarce on fabrics that you're making for your blocks and you want a few more pieces of fabric to continue making more blocks, then by all means trim this out with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can use that fabric to make more star points, or you can just keep them for another project. I personally prefer to take that fabric away, but you certainly don't have to. If you're going to hand quilt your project, I would certainly suggest that you take it away, because the more layers of fabric you have to hand stitch through, the harder it can be, but it's purely up to you. So after you've finished hand stitching, give it a little press and just set it aside, and you can make as many blocks as you choose. And I will be back in about 3 or 4 weeks to talk to you about joining your blocks. So I'm going to head off and make some more blocks and enjoy some peace and quiet maybe, and find a nice little quiet spot and find somewhere cool to do some stitching. So I hope you have enjoyed our sew along, and please don't forget to join our Facebook group for our sew alongs. We've got lots of exciting projects planned, and we love to see your progress. Don't forget, if you have any questions, don't forget to ask, and we're all here to help you. So I hope you've enjoyed this sew along, and we'll hear from you soon. Bye.